Hey there, everyone, and thank you so much for joining me. I was going to say us, but my partner is not on this one. I hope you're having a great Thursday. Today, I'm going to be diving into how to create customer testimonial videos and some of the stuff as B2B marketers that we should consider. So, if you do have any questions or comments, go ahead and add them to this comments area. You're probably watching this on LinkedIn, and we will get to those questions very quickly. And so, a couple things real quick. So, I wanted to kind of think about some of the key pieces here. And so, we'll cover, and by the way, again, if you do have any questions, we can deviate from this, but I just sort of thought about a couple of different kind of components here. So, we'll think about or speak to how to identify the right customer stories, some interview kind of techniques to get some good sound bites, because that's really, really key. You don't want to like have these interviews done, and whether this is you doing them, which I highly recommend, you as the customer success person or the salesperson who has the relationships with these customers, I highly recommend you do those. But maybe you hired an agency to do that, and they have a producer on site asking the questions. We'll speak to kind of some of those uh, ways that you can ask those questions. We'll talk about some of the production options, right? So you can do it with like someone like myself and my agency, or you do it with a tool like StreamYard, which is what I'm using, or like Zoom, or one of these other ones where you can just like, basically create a nice format for creating a virtual testimonial. I know there's some other tools out there that I haven't used, frankly, admittedly, that allow you to capture these things in a cool way. And then lastly, how do you actually like repurpose the content right out there? So let me go ahead and speak to kind of the first piece, which is like, how do you get those great customer stories? I mean, some of this stuff, at least for me, seems, kind of basic and common sense, but we'll touch on it. Meet with your customer success or salespeople, depending on the way that your organization is structured, and understand what your top customers are saying, right? And based on the conversations that they're having. So, what this might mean is like you talk to a CS person, they're like, wow, this customer is saying this about us and our functionality. And is seeing a lot of results. And this is not just like based on, mm, I would say like just like a net. What are those things? The net promoter scores or whatnot. Like there's a comprehensive way of doing this. So what I mean more specifically is like, don't just go into the system and look at some quantitative number that suggests that this customer or these sets of customers are going to be great customer testimonials. Yes, use that as one of the variables, but also like as a B2B organization, who has the best relationship with you, right? Um, that's really, really key. There's a little bit of a component of like, who are some eloquent, clear speakers. I say this lightly because, you might have some customers out there that are able to provide some great value based on the logo or the case, the use case or things like that, and maybe they're not the most eloquent. So I mean, it's a little, there's a little wiggle room there, but certainly great speakers are obviously going to make great customer testimonial videos, right? So you've met with CS or sales, and they've given you a list of customers that they think are going to be great based on these different variables. You want to categorize those, right, into different use cases, different verticals, different however you segment your customers, right, different personas, things like that. And the thing is, like the CS and salespeople, And I say salespeople because, in some organizations, salespeople are managing even post sales, but also salespeople knew what the conversations were at the beginning, right? And why they were really fired up. And hopefully we as an organization have delivered against those kind of that value prop or those value points. So, there's again some of that qualitative storytelling that could be kind of pulled out in the customer testimonial, which the videos are, videos awesome for being able to communicate that kind of stuff, right? So, um, that's another thing I would say. So let's just say you have now this really greatly organized set of potential customers. And by the way, you're probably a customer marketer, again, depending on the size of your organization or how your organization is structured, or maybe you're a product marketer, or maybe you're a single marketer. I'm speaking and kind of sharing this insight for everyone out there. But let's just assume you're that stakeholder on the marketing team that's now handling this task. So you got that list, it's organized, it's well thought out, structured, etc. And now you're actually going to start to reach out to those folks. Now, this is a little tricky sometimes, right? Because you don't want to take up too much of their time, but at the same time, you obviously want to capture these things. And how do you incentivize them to be able to do that? This is where understanding who we have the best relationships with at the organization is going to help. Again, that earlier kind of point that I made, which is like meeting with sales and CS and all that. And this is just not a net promoter score by itself or some quantitative metric, because now you can leverage kind of the relationships that have been built with these other stakeholders to be able to reach out to those folks. Now, you may or may not want to provide some incentives like an Uber card, or depends on also your ACV and and the value that those individuals or those customers have provided to your organization, aka revenue or things like that. I'll leave that up to you to kind of think through in terms of what your budget is and so on. Maybe you do have a budget and you can say, hey, I'll give you $100 in exchange for your time, really appreciate it, here's $100 Uber credit or something. That's awesome, right? And if your ACVs are 100K, that's a drop in the bucket, right? So if this thing helps drive it one deal, I mean, the ROI is is obvious. So you've now reached out, you got these testimonials set up or scheduled, and now you're going to start to do some of this pre-production stuff, right? So some of the ways to structure the customer testimonial videos are really around the sort of narrative that you're kind of pushing through the the interview questions and the way that they're structured, right? So you want it to be a coherent set of questions. You don't want to go from like one extreme to the other, or one part of the story to another. And so there should be, yes, you're going to do editing in post production, I totally get that, but there should be very much like a flow, right? And so it may be like, okay, great, I am going to ask you your first name, last name, title, and what you do at the organization. And so that's a natural first question. And maybe they're going to nail it the first time. Maybe they, depending on the communication ability of the prospect or the customer, I should say, the subject. That's my sales hat saying prospect. That's going to kind of vary, right? So that's what I'm saying. It's like, hi, I'm George Soto, co-founder of GTM Media. I run the organization and do XYZ, right? So kind of getting me warmed up. And that might be something that you include in the video, right? So depending on the style of what you want the narrative to sound like. So some we've done videos for folks where they like that introduction into who the individual is, and sometimes they'll even ask a subsequent question, like, tell us a little bit more about your organization and what it does. Some testimonial videos will add more about the organization. Some will just drive, or jump straight into the value proposition and how the organization leveraged your solution to see success. One of the other tips as you're doing this interviewing is have the subject repeat the question, right? In their response. Not only does that help with post-production editing, with putting the story together and adding context in the narrative, but also it helps them kind of like think through the question in a meaningful way when they're articulating it. So an example might be, my question is, how did go to market, GTM media, help you make videos quicker and on budget? So that's the question that the interviewer asks, and then the subject now repeats it, and you as the interviewer have to actually remind them, because they're going to forget. You might say at the beginning, hey, repeat the question in your answer. You're going to have to do it a couple times, right? So the subject should say something like, it should sound like, the way GTM media helped us create customer testimonial videos quick and on budget is the following, right? Or another version of that is, GTM media really helped us create these awesome customer testimonial videos. They were on budget, on brand, and they did it at a fraction of the time that other vendors in the past have done for us, and they helped us end to end, right? Like something like that, right? So it's adding that context in the interview question. So just some of the tips again: have the questions follow a specific narrative, have the subject repeat the questions in the responses, and leave some wiggle room for the subject to kind of get into the groove and be more comfortable. Some folks are more comfortable speaking in in front of cameras. Others are not. That's obvious. So some production stuff, right? Okay, so you've recruited folks based on all these parameters and categories, and best customers and et cetera, we've talked about. You've now set up a bunch of great questions that follow a narrative, and understand some of the best practices. And now we're going to think about, well, what kind of production do we want to use for creating this, right? So a inexpensive way of doing it is using something like this, StreamYard, that I'm using. So by the way, that's what I'm using here to do this live stream. But they also have a recording function, and you can see there's some of this cute, sort of design that I threw around the actual video frame. So I now can set that up very easily and put that out there, and set in this record. And what's really cool with this, I've done this in the past, where you see there's one, just me on the screen, hello, on the screen, but like you can set up with StreamYard the ability to have someone else on the screen too, but just focus on one subject. So in other words, like I can communicate, like in the user experience, you can see that you can just make it like a solo layout. So I am off camera asking the questions to my customer that's like looking into the camera and answering these questions. So it's a really cool like kind of feature that StreamYard does. So you can record it like that, super easy. You have some of the branding around that StreamYard allows you to do, which is cool. So that's one option. Another option is a high production value kind of production, right? And that is where you're going to have a videographer or video crew drop on site, let's say at your customer's office, and then interviews multiple stakeholders and has lights and high quality audio and and all that sort of stuff, right? The setup that I really like Now this could vary, right? But like I would say the minimum setup that you can kind of put out there to, I think, give yourself a decent production without spending too much. And do you want to spend 20 grand on one? I mean, you can spend 50, you can spend 100 grand, right? Like there's these things can get pretty expensive if you want, depending. I don't know. I think like the point of a testimonial is that it is authentic, and maybe there's a human sort of element to it, right? Like I watch some of these testimonials sometimes on these commercials on TV, which I'm sure cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, of these bigger brands. And I'm like, is that real or is it scripted? You know what I mean? Like you're kind of like on the fence, even though they'll say this is an actual customer. You can see it's a little more polished or buttoned up, right? So there's something about like a little less production value, a little more authentic and raw, which might it might be a little different, right? So it might hit just a little more honest. And so just something to think about, right? When you're kind of figuring out your budget for these kinds of things. But the setup that I was going to mention is like, let's say you're going to interview 2 to 3 stakeholders at the customer. Again, this is a situation where you're on site at your customer's location, and then now you do a microphone, which is like a lavalier mic or a boom mic, right, on the subject, and then you have 1 or 2 lights, right? So hopefully it's in a part of your customer's office that has like some natural light. There's some variables there, so you might want to say, hey, do you have any kind of locations where there's some natural light coming through a window or something? That's always great, because like natural light's awesome. But that's the setup: two DSLR cameras, some lighting, lavalier mics, and that's a pretty decent setup. And you're interviewing 2 to 3 stakeholders within that company, grabbing some B-roll of preferably those stakeholders, like working on their computer or on a whiteboard doing something, or in a meeting, or maybe using your product if you're a software product. I mean, I've worked with hundreds of software companies over the years, and so we always do grab some B-roll of the actual stakeholder or customer, on the computer, kind of clicking away, doing something inside the software product. So there is the B-roll where maybe you're just again showing like a side kind of shot of the stakeholder using the software. You can also introduce like some overlays of the product as well. That'll add a little more complexity, because it's a different like kind of set of footage that you need to gather. This could be as easy as just like doing some screen recordings of some functionality, and then you can overlay it in the editing into the areas that make sense. So there's a lot of different ways, but like you can use your quick player, right, on your Mac to record some screen shares or screen captures. However you've done this in the past, or most of us know how to capture that kind of stuff these days. But that's an easy way. It doesn't have to be super complex. You can just drop that in to the video. And so now you have, in conclusion, you've captured shots of the office, B-roll, signage. It meant your customer on the whiteboard, in meetings, walking around, smiles. Kind of the environment of the office. The interviews where they're speaking to the value prop and all the awesomeness of your solution and company, introducing who they are as a persona, and then maybe you're adding some additional elements like those screen recordings that I mentioned to you. Those are some like really, really easy ways of just putting that, kind of the different ingredients into the video. And then last but not least, you want to get that post produced, right? So whether you're going to edit that yourself or hire someone like us, or someone else. You can go on Fiverr. There's a bunch of different options to get some inexpensive kind of editing done these days. And then now you got a really great customer testimonial video that you can put on your website, in your resource center, on social media. Let's say you have the full version between 2 and, let's just say, 3.5 minutes or something, and then you can chop that up and repurpose it to live on LinkedIn or Twitter, or some of the other channels these days, Instagram, wherever your audience is, right? Really, really powerful. You can repurpose that to live on your blog as an article, or maybe you have like a dedicated customer stories section on your website. So a lot of different ways that you can use this thing. The other thing to keep in mind is this could also be an article, right, that is mostly written, but then you have, for the folks that want to use or consume via video, you can embed that video on there. I love YouTube, of course. YouTube is the number 2 largest, right, search engine in the world. So putting that thing on there is going to have some SEO value as well. So in conclusion, those are just some, kind of laid back, casual thoughts here that I wanted to share around creating customer testimonial videos. I highly, highly, highly recommend getting these customer testimonial video stories out. There's no better way of communicating your value than through the voice of your customers, right? The more authentic that you can get that going, the better, right? So without further ado, have a great day. If you have any questions or whatnot about customer testimonials, go ahead and reach out, and I will talk to you all later.